Hi everyone, my name's Joe and this is the Davenport. I'm here on Thursdays where I read a story from the Bible, kind of filter through my own words and interpretations, and then just kind of chat about what I think the takeaways are. Honestly, I'm just here because I have an interest in studying the Bible, learning more about God's Word, and how I feel like it can apply to our everyday lives. If you have similar goals and interests, I invite you to stick around. I just like to remind people seek and you will find. If you're looking for a reason to believe, you'll find it. If you're looking for a reason to not believe, you will find it. So decide what your intention is right now, and let's get started. All right, today we're just going to dive right in and talk about the story of creation. Maybe if you've kind of grown up in church or Sunday school, you've heard Genesis 1 a lot. However, I can't speak for your experience, but I know that I had never really studied Genesis 1 in Hebrew, so I decided to start with that today. I just want to give a little bit of context on the story of Genesis and when it was written. Authorship is traditionally credited to Moses, as many people know, as well as the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and they are known as the Pentateuch. Now, Genesis was written on the top of Mount Sinai because God spoke to Moses audibly through a burning bush. Just go with it. At about 1500 BC. So we're talking 3,500-ish years ago. I like to remind people Genesis was not written in real time. Just because it was written 3,500 years ago doesn't mean the story happened 3,500 years ago, right? We're having a story that's being written, millions, however, billions of years after it actually happened, just from the account that God gave to Moses, because obviously Moses wasn't there. God was. God is speaking to Moses about what happened, and Moses is writing it down. Now, Mount Sinai is in Israel, so in theory, the story or Genesis was written in Israel, and I think that's all that I kind of want to chat about. So I will just dive in and read Genesis 1 right now, and then we'll just kind of stop and unpack. Genesis 1. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was without form or shape, with darkness over the abyss, and a mighty wind sweeping over the waters. Then God said, "Let there be lights," and there was light. God saw that the light was good. God then separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Evening came and morning followed, the first day. Then God said, "Let there be a dome in the middle of the waters to separate one body of water from the other." God made the dome, and it separated the water below the dome from the water above the dome. And so it happened, God called the dome sky. Evening came and morning followed, the second day. Then God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered into a single basin, so that the dry land may appear." And so it happened, the water under the sky was gathered into its basin, and the dry land appeared. God called the dry land earth, and the basin of water he called sea. God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth vegetation, every kind of plant that bears seed, and every kind of fruit tree on earth that bears fruit with its seed in it." And so it happened. The earth brought forth vegetation, every kind of plant that bears seed, and every kind of fruit tree that bears fruit with its seed in it. And God saw that it was good. Evening came and morning followed, the third day. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky, to separate day from night. Let them mark the seasons, the days, and the years, and serve as lights in the dome of the sky to illuminate the earth." And so it happened. God made the 2 great lights, the greater one to govern the day, and the lesser one to govern the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to illuminate the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. God saw that it was good. Evening came and morning followed, the fourth day. Then God said, "Let the water teem with an abundance of living creatures, and on the earth let birds fly beneath the dome of the sky." God created the great sea monsters and all kinds of crawling living creatures with which the water teems, and all kinds of winged birds. God saw that it was good, and God blessed them, saying, "Be fertile, multiply, and fill the water of the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." Evening came and morning followed, the fifth day. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature, tame animals, crawling things, and every kind of wild animal." And so it happened, God made every kind of wild animal, every kind of tame animal, and every kind of thing that crawls on the ground. God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the tame animals, all the wild animals, and all the creatures that crawl on the earth." God created mankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and all the living things that crawl on the earth." God also said, "See, I give you every seed-bearing plant on all the earth and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit on it to be your food. And to all the wild animals, all the birds of the air, and all the living creatures that crawl on the earth, I give all the green plants for food." And so it happened. God looked at everything he had made and found it very good. Evening came and morning followed, the sixth day. All right, let's just kind of stop and chat about what we read. Now, the first thing I like to point out about Genesis is that Genesis 1 opens with darkness, wind, and water already existing. We aren't given a timestamp for when those three elements are created. The story just opens with them having already been there. So in other words, in my opinion, the first lesson that we get in Genesis in the Bible is you don't need to know everything. You don't need to know every detail about everyone and everything in the entire world. I think that, because we have social media and we see what people are doing and eating and buying and how they're exercising and how they're spending the money and where they're vacationing and who they're marrying and what their wedding dress looks like and how they're planning their retirement. And it opens up this drive for comparison and, for feeling inadequate. And it just really distracts the mind from its purpose, I believe. It distracts us from our purpose, and it consumes our time. It can consume hours of your day, if you allow it to. So in my opinion, the first lesson we get in Genesis is you don't need to know everything. So that's when Genesis 1:1 opens. Now, the second thing I like to point out is that it says that on day one, God speaks and creates light. The word used for Hebrew in light here is or, and everywhere else that or is used in the Old Testament, it's used to either mean the sun or a metaphor for life. Since we're talking about creation and the fact that all creation needs sunlight to live and to grow, I think a fair assumption here is that we're talking about the sun. So we have day one, God speaks and light, comes into existence. Now on day two, God speaks and brings the sky into existence. Now it says that God creates a dome to separate the waters and calls the dome the sky. I think this is interesting because the way I picture it in my mind anyway, we have dome, sky, dome. So it's like sky is sandwiched in between two layers of dome. So in my opinion, it's talking about the waters of the earth and then the waters of the heavens. So I guess that's kind of our first glimpse into what heaven would look like. I think that maybe a lot of people have, some vision that heaven is like clouds and playing the harp, and maybe you wear like a white toga, and you go to choir practice and things like that. I feel like our first glimpse into heaven is that there's water. So, I don't know if maybe like we go to the beach a lot in heaven. If you're a beach person, maybe you go on your boat, you go boating, you go fishing. If you're if you're into fishing, I'm not sure, but I do think that it's noteworthy to point out that the Bible does speak to heaven being everything made new, earth made new in heaven. It's literally everything in its perfect form is heaven. So it's like perfect, ocean or perfect beaches or whatever, perfect lakes, is what the water in heaven would look like. I'm not sure. So if you're a water person, then that might interest you. Or if you're a beach person, that might interest you. I guess, we're all water people, I would say. Okay. So evening came and morning followed the first day. Then God said, all right, so now where are we? Now on day 3, God speaks the waters into piles that he then calls seas and then separates them with dry land. And then we also have plant life being created. Now on day 4, it says that God makes the sun and the moon. This is when I want to highlight the specific language that's used in Genesis 1 for creation. The only time the word create, which in Hebrew is barach, is used is just in Genesis 1:1. After that, there is a specific cadence of creation where it says, and God said, and it was, and God said, and so it was, and God said, and so it was. In Hebrew, and he said is vayomer, and in Hebrew, and so it was is vaihi. So we're getting vayomer, and he said, vaihi, and so it was. Vayomer, and he said, vaihi, so it was, right? Now, on day 4, in verse 16, it says, God made the 2 great lights, the greater one to govern the day and the lesser one to govern the night. This is when the word changes to made. Now, made in Hebrew is ayas. Everywhere else that ayas is used in the Old Testament, it's used to say prepare as in a meal. If I was going to say that I think it's fair to say that create and prepare are both synonyms for the word make, but create and prepare don't mean the same thing. If I was going to say that I created a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, if we're going with that meal metaphor or analogy, I wouldn't, if I was going to say I created a sandwich, it's kind of like I don't know, waved my hands and the sandwich appeared or something, right? But if I was going to say I prepared the sandwich, I'm literally saying that I'm putting a sandwich together with, I'm purposing ingredients together with a sandwich that out of ingredients that already existed. I'm putting a sandwich together with ingredients that already existed is what I'm trying to say. I'm giving the ingredients purpose into being the sandwich. So let's apply that to verse 16. Here it says God makes the 2 great lights, one to govern the day, one to govern the night. So a fair assumption here is we're talking about the sun and the moon. On day 4, verse 16, God makes the sun and the moon. So remember, on day 1, we said God created the sun. So how could God make the sun on day 4, right? I believe this is saying on day 1, God's creating the sun, but on day 4, God is giving the sun its purpose. And it says the purpose that God's giving the sun is to govern the day, to manage the day. And then we have, and God makes the moon to govern the night and the stars. So in other words, Genesis 1 is telling us that on day 1, the sun is created, and on day 4, it's made. The moon is made on day 4. So when was it created? It doesn't say. This is another example of we're not given a timestamp for when the moon's created. We're given a timestamp for when the moon is given purpose. It's made on day 4, as in it's prepared on day 4 for its purpose. We aren't told when it's made. We aren't told when it's created. Now, it's also worth pointing out, in my opinion, a lot of English translations will also say in verse 16 that this is when God creates the stars. It does not say that in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, there is no verb before the word stars. There's just the Hebrew preposition et, which is a silent preposition that is used to introduce a direct object that hasn't previously been mentioned before. So in other words, verse 16 is having the Hebrew et before stars. It's saying God prepares the moon to govern the night, et, and the stars, which is kind of like a spotlight on a new direct object or a new noun that hasn't been mentioned before. So we aren't told when the stars are created, but this is the first time that the stars are mentioned. In other words, let's review what we aren't told when it's created. Water, wind, darkness, moon, stars. Those 5 things we aren't given a timestamp for when they are created. After this, we have a pretty straightforward creation lineage. Fish, sea monsters, and birds on day 5, mammals and humans, it says, on day 6. Now let's stop and talk a little bit about creation according to science. Now, according to science, water is older than both the earth and the sun, but not older than the stars. Stars are credited as being about 13 plus or minus billion years-ish old. The sun, 4.6-ish billion years old. The earth, 4.54 billion years. The moon, 4.53. Plant life at 600-ish million years old. Fish at 530 million years old. Dinosaurs, 220 million. Birds, 150 million. Mammals, 80 million. And humans, anywhere between 2 and 6 million years old. Now, I want to put a bookmark here and come back to this, and I want to talk about the word day that's used in the Hebrew. Some people do believe that Genesis 1 is explaining the story of creation in 6 24-hour periods. And that theory is known as young Earth creationism. And according to that theory, the Earth would be about 6,000 years old. I do not believe that. In Hebrew, the word used for day is yom, and yom is used interchangeably with the singular and the plural, and it's also used to mean groups of days or set of days, and in prepositional phrases like in the day of or back in the day. In other words, yom is used to mean either day, days, groups of days, set of days, or in the day of. So by that interpretation, Genesis 1 isn't saying the first day, the second day, the third day. It's saying the first group of days, the second group of days, the third group of days, and so on. So by that interpretation, this first group of days would actually be 8 billion years long. The second would be 4 billion, and the third would be 2 billion. So they're getting progressively shorter as we move along. Also, remember in verse 16, on that fourth group of days, that's when God purposed the moon to tell time, days, months, seasons, holidays, what have you. So if the concept of measuring time wasn't created until that fourth group of days, we really can't say that everything up until that point was 24-hour periods because time wasn't being measured, right? So that is the theory on yom, meaning either day, days, or group of days. So Genesis 1, then in theory, it wouldn't be saying the first day, the second day, the third day. It'd be saying the first group of days, the second group of days, the third group, and so on. All right, now I want to chat a little bit about dinosaurs. As of course, we're all aware, dinosaurs aren't mentioned in Genesis 1 in English. Let's talk a little bit about that fifth group of days in Genesis. Genesis 1 mentions fish, then sea creatures, then mammals. Now, this word used for sea creatures in the Hebrew is tannin. I think I'm pronouncing it right. If I'm not, let me know. Everywhere else that tannin is used in the Old Testament in Hebrew, it's used to describe a dragon or like a dragon-like creature. It's also important to mention that tannin is never mentioned as having lived at the same time as humans. It's always used in like an arbitrary way or a comparison way to describe a time period before humans existed or to compare a human to a dragon. An example is in Ezekiel 29:3, it says, "The Lord God says, behold, I am against you, King Pharaoh, the great dragon that lies in the river." So this verse is God comparing King Pharaoh to a dragon or a tannin. In other words, the verse isn't saying King Pharaoh had a pet dragon or rode a dragon or looked outside his window and saw dragons running around. It's comparing King Pharaoh to a dragon, but it isn't saying anything about King Pharaoh actually living at the same time period as dragons. So in other words, we know a tannin is used to describe a dragon-like creature that lived before humans existed. So, in my opinion, Genesis 1, that word that is in English is translated as sea creatures, but tannin should be translated in English as dinosaurs, in my opinion. It's not. I don't know who makes those decisions. It's somebody that probably has a lot more power and makes a lot more money than I do. However, that person, for whatever reason, chose sea creatures to translate that word. In my opinion, it should be translated as dinosaurs because we're talking about a dragon-like creature that lived before humans. All right, so I want to go back and review the order of creation according to science. According to science, the order of creation is stars, water, sun, earth, moon, plants, fish, dinosaurs, birds, mammals, humans. And according to Genesis, the order of creation is water, sun, earth, plants, fish, dinosaurs, birds, mammals, humans. So science and creation follow the exact same order. Science and Genesis follow the exact same order of creation, with the exception of water, moon, and stars, because Genesis 1 doesn't tell us when those three elements were created. It's just not included in the story. It's just not for us to know. It's just not included in there. We just aren't given the timestamp for when they're created. But science and Genesis, as we see now, have the exact same timeline for creation. All right, the last thing that I want to chat about today is this third theory, recently created from the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology. I can't say that word. According to them, they believe that Genesis 1 actually describes two separate creation stories. Genesis 1:1, God created the heavens and the earth. That's kind of like a blanket, God created everything. And then what they believe is that in between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2 and 3, that would be when Lucifer fell from heaven, was banished from heaven. We'll talk about Lucifer another day. It's another conversation for another day. But a lot of people believe that Lucifer was at one point banished from heaven, basically destroyed all of creation and kind of like a temper tantrum. And that would be, and what they're saying is that would be the asteroid that wiped out all of dinosaurs. Then God comes in and recreates everything and basically like skips over dinosaurs, doesn't create dinosaurs the second time around, if that makes sense. So based on that interpretation, billions of years would have transpired between verses 1 and 2 alone, and millions of years would have transpired between verses 2 and 3. This angelic rebellion is also described in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. So this angelic rebellion of Lucifer and his demons destroying all of creation in like a temper tantrum would be the asteroid that wiped out dinosaurs and much of creation, and destroyed much of the land. And then God came in and recreated all of creation and kind of skipped over dinosaurs, is basically what they're saying. So based on that theory, the tannin, the sea creatures that we were talking about earlier, wouldn't be dinosaurs then. They would really be sea creatures probably. So I'm not 100% sure, if I, how on board with that I am. I do think it's a fair argument. I do think it is a fair assumption. Although I guess I can't speak as much to that theory as they have. I haven't studied it to the extent that they have. Although I do think it's worth mentioning because I know that a lot of people would be interested in reading more about it. And I will include those sources in this video. So this asteroid that wiped out all of the dinosaurs is, in science terms, known as the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction, and that Cretaceous Paleogene extinction would be Lucifer destroying creation in his temper tantrum. I call it a temper tantrum. I'm sure there's a theological term for that, but that's what I call it. So to sum up, Genesis 1 and 2 would be the Mesozoic era, which is the era of the age of the dinosaurs. And then Genesis 1-3 on would mark the Cenozoic era, which is the era of humans and mammals, which is what we're living in now. So I just think that is an interesting theory that I wanted to include, and I'm sure that other people would have interest in reading about it as well. So that's all that I had to chat about in the story of creation. I thought it was really important to jump in with this right away. If you have anything to add, if I pronounced something wrong, said something wrong, included the wrong information, I would welcome any feedback, as I'm definitely here to be taught as well as teach. Yeah, I think that's everything. So hopefully you found this interesting, and you will consider joining me again next time. Until then, thank you for sharing your time and your space with me today, and I'll see you soon. Bye.